So we started to record our meeting for those students who study now and to share the lecture. And it's our honor and privilege to have today with us Víneta Kляйне, Director of NATO Information and Documentation Center. And today, I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to learn more about the activities of Center in Ukraine, also Víneta's experience working in NATO Information and Documentation Center. And also recently, Víneta posted on her Facebook that NATO, the EU and the US urging Ukrainian parliament to adopt important Euro-Atlantic legislation, including state security service reform, which is, I think, very important signal that Ukraine sticks to its commitments, obligations, and actually it's important to show progress and especially before, I think, historic NATO Parliamentary Assembly next year. And also it's a part of Верховна Rada obligations to adopt important legislation in judiciary, security and defense reform. So dear students, I think you will meet Víneta in person in Kyiv in December, but as we agreed, before conducting this youth model of NATO PA, it's important for you to receive a lot of information, knowledge, experience from our lectures. And today we have Víneta Kляйне. So Víneta, please. You shared already the presentation, yes?
Did I? Is it shared?
So we can, but before, probably first the greetings and then.
Yeah, Hannah, thanks a lot, and thanks for giving the floor, and many thanks, for inviting, to give a lecture. Also, it's, Friday afternoon, late afternoon. So anyway, I think we'll stay together not longer than 5:30. So when I was offered to give a lecture, then I thought, well, how should I structure it? And then I thought of two things. I'll start on NATO and collective security, and also since I don't know how much you know about NATO, definitely you certain things you know, and I'll also try to throw in some basic facts. And second part of our meeting will be devoted to NATO's public diplomacy efforts. I think for some of you, maybe it comes as a surprise. So NATO and public diplomacy. So what has NATO common with public diplomacy? But then I will explain that. So, but then, let's go slowly. And while I'll be speaking about NATO's public diplomacy efforts, then I'll also share some slides. Yeah, indeed, NATO has entered its 8th decade of existence, because NATO was established on 4th of April in 1949, and the goal of the establishment of the alliance was to ensure peace and stability on the European continent after 2 devastating world wars. And by the way, yesterday we also celebrated November 11th. It's a day when we commemorate all those fallen soldiers who have fallen in past conflicts. And November 11, it's also a significant day, since I come from Latvia. It's also a significant day for Latvia, because then Riga was liberated from joint German and Russian troops in 1919, and also it's all a day of Latvian armed force. So, but going back to NATO, indeed there were 12 nations, 12 who've signed the founding agreement or treaty, and amongst them was Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And in fact, NATO is the only place that brings Europe and North America together and does it on everyday basis. And the ability and will to act collectively against shared threats ensures that alliance is credible and ensures its vitality and durability. And if we look at alliance, you know that the basic principle it's shared security, and it's Article 5, which we can also express as a slogan or motive, one for all and all for one. And the ability, and will to act collectively is embedded into alliance. It's a foundation for the alliance. And over the decades, NATO has been the most successful security alliance because it has been able to permanently and consistently adapt to an ever-changing security environment, because in security environment changes constantly. And the core mission of NATO throughout all these decades has stayed the same, namely its collective defense. However, if we look now at it in a much broader sense of term, it means to keep our people, to keep our values, and our democracy safe. So that's the main thing.
Vінeta, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Yeah. Well, so we are sharing slides now or later? Sorry.
I'll do it later.
Later. Okay.
Yeah,
so because students are asking, they don't see any slides. So
no, I'll do it later. So now we'll speak about public diplomacy.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Yeah. And if we look at security, so it's not only about symmetric, it's also about asymmetric threats. And security, since our information environment, the environment where we live and find ourselves, it's expanding and it's getting more and more complex. That's why the very definition of security is also much broader, much more complex, and much more intertwined between traditional defense and security and new forms of security than in the past. And later on, we will talk about these new forms of security. And we see how the rules-based international order is being undermined by authoritarian powers. We witness, and especially Ukrainians, we witness how Russia continues its pattern of aggressive behavior. We see that China is challenging accepted norms of international relations. We see how terrorism threatens the safety of our citizens, how new technologies are changing the nature of conflict, and how cyber attacks become more frequent, and how climate change threatens to multiply crisis. So we see all this mix. And both state and non-state actors promote disinformation and propaganda, including COVID-19 related disinformation. And the current pandemic, it has fundamentally affected all areas of our life, and everybody will admit that. And when it comes to security, it has magnified and intensified existing trends and tensions. And NATO has been adapting to a changing world very successfully for decades. And since 2014, when Crimea was illegally and illegitimately annexed, we have implemented the largest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation. What it means that we have enhanced our ability to defend all allies on land at sea and in the air, and also in cyberspace and in space. And this adaptation continues, and NATO is stepping up in response to the threats and the challenges of today and tomorrow. And yes, NATO must continue to adapt to a more unpredictable and more competitive world, because we are dealing with challenges that no country can address alone. And all this, what I have said, it leads to NATO Secretary General's initiative, NATO 2030. And I assume that you have heard about NATO 2030. And here I will insert that right now, NATO consists of 30 member countries, and 2 last countries that joined the alliance are from the Balkans, from the Western Balkans. It's Montenegro and North Macedonia. And I just mentioned also NATO Secretary General, just also that everyone we know that currently Secretary General is Jens Stoltenberg. And Secretary General is the main spokesperson of the alliance. And that is important to keep into mind when we will talk about NATO's public diplomacy efforts later on. So speaking about NATO 2030, what does it mean? It was in December 2019, just shortly before the COVID pandemic hit us all, that NATO leaders at the NATO Summit in London, and a NATO Summit is a venue at which come together heads of allies, state and government, and then they sit at the table, and also at NATO summits are taken the most important decisions. And in London in 2019, leaders at the NATO Summit invited the Secretary General to lead a forward-looking reflection process. Why? Because also NATO leaders understand that we need to strengthen NATO's political dimension. And at this point, I want to underline that NATO is both. It's a political and military alliance, and that we should keep in mind. And the NATO 2030 reflection process was launched. And then in June 2020, last year, the Secretary General, he laid out his priorities for NATO 2030. And these priorities were to make sure that NATO remains strong militarily, that NATO becomes even stronger politically, and that NATO takes a more global approach. And when we speak about NATO's global approach, it means that NATO has 30 member states, and then NATO engages with more than 40 partners or partner nations, among which is also Ukraine. And during the reflection process, the Secretary General consulted widely. He consulted with allies and received inputs from an independent group of experts. And he also engaged with civil society, with young people like you, with parliamentarians and the private sector, because all these stakeholders and their opinion and their comments and ideas were important to help shape the NATO 2030 agenda. And now we'll talk shortly about what is NATO 2030 about. It's about how we adapt to the new international security environment, which as we already agreed, includes more diverse spread of symmetric and asymmetric security challenges like climate change, use of new technologies, critical supply chains, and their resilience, including cybersecurity. However, at the same time, the old challenges such as terrorism, arms race, and nuclear armament continue to pose a significant threat. So we have these old or traditional security challenges and a group of new security challenges. And if NATO wishes to remain a relevant security provider for its 30 member states, it must continue to adapt. And to do it, NATO must stay strong militarily, be more united politically, and take a broader approach globally. Therefore, NATO 2030 is about reinforcing, underlining alliances unity. It's about broadening our approach to security due to new security challenges. And it's about strengthening our global partnerships in order to maintain the rules-based international order. And as we look to 2030, allies have to continue to invest in their armed forces and modern military capabilities, because NATO doesn't have an army per se. It's usually when, for example, NATO leaders or allies, member states agree to deploy peacekeeping mission or operation, it means that NATO member states, they contribute to certain mission or operation with their troops, financially, and with equipment. And 2021 is the 7th consecutive year of increased defense spending by European allies and Canada. It means that 9 allies are expected to spend 2% of their GDP on defense, compared to only 3% in 2014. And if I'm not mistaken, then Ukraine is, for example, spending out of its GDP on defense now more than 2%. And this year also, to 2024, allies will meet the guideline of investing at least 20% of their defense budgets in major new equipment, compared to 7% in 2014. So we see these dynamics. At the same time, allies are also discussing how to invest more together, how to do more these joint investments, how to invest more together in NATO so that they can do more together. And allies also continue to contribute forces to NATO deployments. And as the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us, our armed forces play an essential role in responding to crises of all types. And we have seen how during the COVID pandemic, also allied militaries have helped to set up hospitals, and also they have helped to guard borders, and they have been involved in other duties. However, military strength is only part of the answer, because we also need to use NATO more politically. And this means bringing all the issues that affect our security to NATO's table. And maybe you have seen that usually it's a round table at which NATO member states are seated according to an alphabetical order. So it means that, it starts with a letter A, and it's Albania, and then it's then follows letter B, it's Belgium, and so on and so on. And so that we can reach consensus sooner and more systematically, because all decisions at NATO are taken on consensus base. So it means that all 30 member states agree. And from conflicts in the wider Middle East region to global arms control and the security consequences of climate change, all these are the issues and topics on NATO's agenda. And using NATO more politically, it also means using a broader range of tools. It means usage of military and non-military, economic and diplomatic tools. And accordingly, as part of the NATO 2030 initiative, we will broaden our approach to security. This means an increased focus on resilience. In Ukraine, it would be stilkis. It means that how resilient is our infrastructure, how resilient are supply chains of energy and electricity and communications and water. And NATO already plays an important role in strengthening resilience. And it means including setting minimum standards for allies. And allies have agreed 7 baseline requirements for national resilience. And resilience is also an area where NATO and Ukraine works very closely. And these 7 baseline requirements include that in case of crisis, that there is a continuity of government and critical government services. It's also about resilient energy supplies, ability to deal effectively with uncontrolled movement of people. It's about resilient food and water resources, about ability to deal with mass casualties. It's about resilient civil communication systems and resilient transport systems. You see, it's very important that transport system, keeps functioning. The government can deal effectively with mass casualties, and then there are also food and water resources sufficient, and that energy supplies are uninterrupted. And furthermore, technological innovations are changing the nature of peace, crisis, and conflict. And in this regard, allies have identified 7 key emerging and disruptive technologies about which you have also heard. It's artificial intelligence, it's data and computing, it's autonomy, quantum-enabled technologies, biotechnology, hypersonic technology, and space. And in this regard, also, allies have agreed on an implementation strategy. And it sets out ways in which we can work with our partners, academia, and the private sector, including startups, to develop new technologies more quickly and strengthen our industrial base. And accordingly, as part of the NATO 2030 initiative, we are looking at very concrete ways to sharpen our technological edge and prevent technological gaps among allies. And speaking about cyber threats, we all are witness of the fact that they become more frequent, they are more complex and more destructive. And accordingly, NATO takes cyber threats very seriously, and we are constantly stepping up our cyber defense. NATO also recognizes climate change as a security challenge for many years. And there are 3 areas where NATO has an important role to play in addressing climate change. And I assume that for some of you, maybe also it comes as surprise that NATO also deals with climate change phenomena. First, we need to increase our awareness and understanding by monitoring and tracking climate change much more closely at NATO in order to better understand and anticipate its impact on our security. And this includes investing more in research and sharing data and analysis. Second thing is that NATO must adapt so we can continue to operate in all conditions. It means including extreme heat and cold. And for example, this summer we've also witnessed, and I spent this summer a couple of weeks back home in Latvia, and we also witnessed extreme heat, so which was such degrees plus Celsius, which we usually don't have. And it includes extreme heat and cold, rising sea levels, and natural disasters. And much of our critical infrastructure is exposed to rising sea levels and more extreme weather. And also our troops are being increasingly called on to respond to natural disasters. And in this regard, the third factor is that we need to play our part in reducing military emissions. So we also need to contribute to decreasing our dependence on fossil fuel supply. Now, shortly about strategic communication, because strategic communication is a critical tool of deterrence and defense. Why? Because for some challengers and adversaries, information is now a domain of contest. And disinformation, propaganda, they are especially dangerous in times of rapid technological advancements. NATO takes disinformation very seriously, and the best response is to make sure that facts and the truth are available. And that is what NATO does. We don't respond to disinformation or propaganda campaigns with disinformation. No, we use facts and verifiable facts and credible information. And our communications are fact-based, they are timely, transparent, and coordinated. And we also coordinate our efforts with such international organizations as the European Union, United Nations, G7. And this allows us to have an impact in a contested information space. And we use the full spectrum of media engagements by the Secretary General and other NATO officials. We use at large scale digital communications. We use face-to-face engagements, hybrid events, online, offline, social media, and other tools. And in a world of greater global competition, NATO also needs a more global approach. And it's not about a global presence, but it's about a global approach. And accordingly, NATO 2030 agenda is about strengthening alliances partnerships, including our long-standing distinctive partnership with Ukraine, and also forging new ones with like-minded nations, with whom we share common values. And over the years, the Alliance has developed a network of partnerships with more than 40 non-member countries from the Euro-Atlantic area, the Mediterranean and the Gulf region, and other partners across the globe. For example, Colombia, Iraq, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Mongolia, New Zealand, Pakistan, and others. And NATO pursues dialogue and practical cooperation with its partners on a wide range of political and security-related issues. And over the last years, NATO and European Union cooperation has been lifted up to unprecedented levels. And we do more together in such areas as cybersecurity, tackling propaganda, and disinformation. And NATO and the EU work also together in the Aegean Sea. And NATO Secretary General calls regular meetings with EU leadership. And this year in June, We held a very short, but still we held a NATO summit in Brussels. And then during the summit in Brussels, NATO leaders agreed the NATO 23 agenda, and also they agreed the concrete proposals to make NATO stronger and ready for the future. And I will shortly speak about these proposals. The first proposal is about deeper political consultation and coordination, because it's important that in order to strengthen NATO's role as the unique and indispensable platform for transatlantic consultations on security and defense, Allied leaders agreed to deepen and broaden political consultations in NATO, namely to consult more often on all issues that affect allies' security, such as arms control, climate change, security, and emerging disruptive technologies. Second proposal was to strengthen deterrence and defense. What it means. Since 2014, NATO has implemented the biggest reinforcement of Allied collective defense in a generation. And it was agreed to take further steps to strengthen the alliance's military posture, continue to increase defense spending, and modernize capabilities. Third proposal was improved resilience, because resilience is our first line of defense, and it is essential for NATO to successfully fulfill its three core tasks, which are collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. The fourth proposal is to preserve our technological edge. It means, as we see, emerging technologies are changing the nature of peace, crisis, and conflict, and therefore allies agreed to launch a new civil military defense innovation accelerator, to boost or strengthen, increase transatlantic cooperation on critical technologies, promote interoperability, and use civilian innovation by engaging with academia and the private sector. And again, you see how important it is to work with academia, with the private sector. The fifth proposal was to uphold the rules-based international order. And when we speak about rules-based international order, it means that in order to remain successful and ensure security in the Euro-Atlantic area, NATO needs to adopt a more global approach to tackle global challenges to Allied security. And accordingly, allies agreed to strengthen NATO's relationships with like-minded partners, as I already mentioned, and build new engagements, including in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And it's not about more global presence, but it's about more global approach. And also during the summit, NATO allies reconfirmed that NATO remains committed to countries that aspire for NATO membership, and that NATO remains committed to its open door policy. At the moment, there are 3 aspiring countries. It's Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's Georgia, and Ukraine. And allies also took steps during the Brussels summit to further deepen and strengthen cooperation with the European Union. Then the 6th proposal is to boost training and capacity building. Training of troops, and also capacity building. And when NATO's neighbors are more stable, we are also more secure. And accordingly, allies agreed to increase NATO efforts to build the capacity of our partners in areas like counterterrorism, stabilization, countering hybrid attacks, crisis management, peacekeeping, defense reform, among others. And NATO representation in Ukraine, it consists of two offices. It's NATO Information and Documentation Center, which I represent, and then NATO Liaison Office. A NATO Liaison Office has advisors, and they work on a daily basis with Ukrainian counterparts, and they help to move ahead to progress with reforms in Ukraine's security and defense sector. So, and we also, NATO helps a lot Ukraine when it comes to defense reform and security sector reforms. And the seventh proposal is combat and adapt to climate change, because as we already agreed, climate change is a significant challenge of our time. And accordingly, NATO leaders endorsed a new NATO action plan on climate change and security, with the aim of making NATO the leading international organization when it comes to understanding and adapting to the impact of climate change and security. And leaders also committed to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions for military activities and installations. And they invited the Secretary General to develop a concrete target for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by the NATO political and military structures and facilities, and also to assess the feasibility of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. And the sixth proposal is the next strategic concept, because NATO strategic concept describes the overarching security environment in which the alliance operates. And it also states NATO's purpose and core tasks, and sets the strategic direction for its political and military adaptation. And NATO's current strategic concept, and also I invite you to remember, the strategic concept, the name of the document, because it's one of the also basic documents. The current one was agreed in 2010, and it has served NATO well. However, the world during last 11 years has fundamentally changed, and therefore at the summit, NATO leaders invited the Secretary General to lead the process to develop NATO's next strategic concept. And the last proposal is investing in NATO, and because to respond to a more complex and unpredictable security environment, NATO allies have substantially increased overall defense spending, as I already explained. And accordingly, at the summit in June, allied leaders committed to ensuring the alliance has the right resources to deliver on the NATO 2030 decisions. So, and at the same time, allies are also looking at how to invest more together in NATO. So this was, a sum up of NATO and collective security. So I gave you a lot of information, and I know, that we also, our brain is constructed the way that we can consume information for a certain period of time, and then we start to get tired a bit. That's why now I would like to switch to a different topic. So it's about NATO through the prism of public diplomacy. And I will try to show also some slides, and let me try to do it. And then please let me know if you can see the slide. Can you see the photo?
Yes.
Good, yeah, okay, perfect. So then we will go through NATO's public diplomacy efforts, because I also come from NATO public diplomacy division, and I will explain you why NATO has public diplomacy division, what it means. Public diplomacy is a key mechanism through which nations and organizations, they foster mutual trust and productive relationships. And usually public diplomacy is employed by a state. That's why, for example, a state has its embassies in various countries, and a certain state has many ambassadors. And this public diplomacy, usually we attribute to state. However, also international organizations also use public diplomacy component. And public diplomacy has become crucial to building a secure global environment. And public diplomacy has always been an essential part of NATO's mission. And NATO's main goal in conducting public diplomacy is raising awareness and understanding about NATO. And that's also the core task of NATO Information Center in Kyiv, in Ukraine, to raise awareness, understanding, and increase information of NATO's agenda and then the NATO-Ukraine cooperation. And NATO's public diplomacy activities are designed to build both relationships and networks with opinion formers and journalists, with representatives of non-governmental sector, also to facilitate dialogue among security experts, and also work with the media and journalists, and generate interest in transatlantic issues among population. And NATO directs its public diplomacy efforts at home. When I say at home, I mean NATO's 30 member states, and also among partner audiences. And now we will go through this historical aspect, and I will also show you some interesting photos. So on this photo, we can see it's a moment when 12 founding states signed the Washington Treaty, because it took place in Washington. So we can see the treaty signing moment. And if you remember, I mentioned also a NATO summit in London in 2019, when it was decided, or when NATO allies asked Secretary General to start or to launch NATO 2030 process. And you can see here, I mentioned this round table. Yeah, you see, all at this moment, there are 29 member states, because North Macedonia joined the alliance in 2020. And member states sit around the table in an alphabetical order. So, and here also, here is the Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg. He is giving a press briefing. And here we come also to some old photo, and those who know Greek language can read, because it's a bus on which is written something in Greek. So you have to guess what's written in Greek language. So, historical insight. The idea of informing the people of allied member countries about NATO's origins and why the alliance was established dates back to 1951. And we remember that the alliance was established in April 1949. And already after 2 years, it was clear that, yes, there are 12 member states, but at that time, there was no TV, there was also radio. And of course, if people, lived somewhere far away in the countryside or high in the mountains, so of course, they also not always, newspapers not always reach them. That's why it was also decided that, we need to run an information campaign. And at the time, the only channels of information were newspapers and the radio. And people who lived for far from major cities, they only rarely had access to them. And hence the idea of going out to meet those people. And with this aim in mind, in 1952, the first traveling exhibition, and which that was called Caravan of Peace, which was made up of a large tent and a trailer, set off from a NATO headquarters. And at that time, NATO headquarters were located in Paris and now in Brussels. Then they, set off, and then they started to make this traveling exhibition started to make its way down to Italy. First, it went to Italy, and it was an immediate success. So, and then it was decided that the trailer should also travel to Greece and Turkey. And the traveling exhibition in such a way made its way through all the countries of the alliance in this way, and all the member states at that time. But I think I go a bit further. So yeah, in the mid-50s, NATO decided that a more robust public information campaign or program must be applied, and which would include cultural projects, foreign exchanges, seminars to teachers, and also distribution of educational materials in schools. And so NATO's public engagement also took a new impetus. And in 1960, the concept of mobile information center was reviewed, and NATO sold its 5 trucks. One of them we saw in the previous slide. It sold its 5 trucks in order to buy 2 fully equipped information buses. And you see these information buses. And these new vehicles were better suited to operations in far away countries and in more complex environments, for example, up in the mountains. Or where it was also easier, to drive on rocky roads. And they were also escorted by a technician and an officer from the armed forces of the NATO host nation, where this truck would travel, because they would answer to audience's questions. And thus buses were also designed to be used as movie theaters that could accommodate up to 50 adults. And here we see, and if the weather was good and nice, then also a screen was set outside, and people would, would stand. I think they're standing. And I think it's Greece and in Plak area. So they would also stay outside. And NATO's 2 information buses toured through the countries of the alliance until the 70s, by which time most households in NATO member states already had TVs. Public diplomacy nowadays. So TV made a radical also change in the way we work. That is something what I want to show you later. So public diplomacy nowadays. As the world was changing, also NATO was changing, and as technology evolved, so did NATO's communication and public diplomacy. And 2003, actually, NATO was the first international organization that set up its public diplomacy department. And all major events have, in these days, they have a press component. And here you can see how Secretary General is also giving a press briefing also during the summit, NATO summit in London. And also very often they have a public engagement component. Major public diplomacy events became a norm to every NATO summit. And I recall 2006, because at that time I was working at the Ministry of Defense in Latvia back home. And in 2006, Latvia hosted Riga Summit. And we had a special office which was established to organize. And that was indeed a very huge event. And we were getting prepared for a year to get ready for the summit. And we, during the summit, we also wanted to show you Latvian culture. And for example, each member of summit, including journalists, they got a set of like a present box. There was a jar of honey and cranberries and linden tea. And also each member or each participant of the summit got, you see, knitted mutton. So knitted mutton with Latvian ornaments. So, and there were involved, you know, thousands of ladies and also men who would knit, you know, for participants of the summit muttons. And here we also see how Secretary General is giving press conference. And this is a bit later when we'll talk about cultural diplomacy. And where do we have? So that will go back. So this is also a photo that reflects, because a couple of years ago, NATO headquarters, you moved to a new building. And it has a huge, like, agora, you know, if those who know Greek language, agora means, you know, like a place where ancient Greeks used to meet and then chat and discuss and then discuss about political events and novelties. So, and also in this huge, you know, glass cascaded building. So there are also flags according to alphabetical order. So engagement, I'll go back. So engagement with audiences. The Alliance aims to bring also younger generations into the discussion. And that's why, for example, Secretary General and other NATO leaders, they engage with young people. We also hold summer schools. So for example, NATO Information Documentation Center in Ukraine. We also support NATO academia. Or academy in summer and autumn. Then we also organize essay competitions for students and young professionals. And for example, within the framework of Secretary General's NATO 2030 initiative, for example, in November last year, a year ago, NATO Secretary General had hosted NATO's first ever youth summit. And you are participants of NATO's Parliamentary Assembly's Youth Summit. So, and NATO organizes events and conferences to engage experts, decision makers, and other types of specific audiences. Also, NATO has its own TV channel. And by the way, NATO has excellent web page on which you can find information and then also video materials and information and articles and scripts of interviews in English, in French, because NATO has two official languages, it's English and in French, and also you can find information in Ukrainian, by the way. And NATO also use lots of digital materials, also social media platforms. It's YouTube channel, Instagram, Twitter, a Facebook page, and Flickr, and many other information channels. Another thing, so now I will talk about a little bit about NATO's public diplomacy and art. And again, NATO and art, how does it come? So, but actually NATO story and symbols are woven in the new building of NATO headquarters. And here we can see, and I will explain a little bit more. Because the design of the building symbolizes the fingers, if you look like fingers, of two hands which are interlocked. in a gesture of protection. So it has a meaning, and it's very symbolical meaning. It's a gesture of protection, representing the mission of the alliance. It is to protect. And at the main entrance to the building, visitors and staff are greeted by two reminders of NATO's mission. And we will talk shortly about these two historical remindings. Here on this photo, you can see two segments of the Berlin Wall. And these two segments of the Berlin Wall illustrate visibly the role NATO played during the Cold War, including its ultimate success in tearing down the wall. So, and this photo is from the moment, or from the event when these, and also we see, you know, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, so also representing, you know, these two segments of the Berlin Wall. And second artifact which you can also see, and I hope that at certain point you will have a chance to visit NATO headquarters in Brussels. We see also from an event during which and which represents, you see, behind you see a steel beam from the 107th floor of the World Trade Center 1 in New York City. And it is the reminder of the role the alliance plays in the fight against terrorism. And the monument also commemorates the only time, because that was the only time in the history of the alliance when Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty was ever invoked in defense of one of the allies. And in that case, it was the United States after the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. And another thing which is also, for example, here you can very well, you can see very well the agora, this, you know, glass central place at HQ. And there was also on the 6th of November, yeah, shortly before the pandemic, the Oxford Philharmonic Orchestra performed in the agora, celebrating the 70th anniversary of the alliance. And this, yeah, this is the moment of the Oxford Philharmonic Orchestra concert. And also on a regular basis, NATO holds exhibitions, and here you can see it's an opening of an exhibition which took place in January 2020. It's an art installation, Dandelions, which was hosted marking the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So, and it's the opening of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day at NATO HQ. So, and here we can also see Dandelions. So, yeah, and the center is Deputy Secretary General, yeah, Mircea Geoana. So that we see. So, yeah, as I already mentioned, of course, like life has been significantly changed during the COVID times. And if before the pandemic, NATO used more like in-person engagements, then, and we can see one of those. So then during the COVID, also NATO moved more to digital communication. And NATO also has its own studio. And here also, yeah, former, yeah, NATO Secretary, Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, also is engaging with audience from the studio. And we can also see some other engagements during with the public during the COVID times. So, or maybe, yeah, maybe even could be before. So, yeah, the COVID times. So again, Studio Secretary General is giving a briefing, and that, yeah, that is. And shortly about NATO Information Documentation Center in Kyiv, as I already mentioned, because I'm from there. So here you can see former director of NATO Information Documentation Center, Barbara Marunkova. She did fantastic job here, also engaging with students and then the academia and non-governmental sectors. So, and also touring around Ukraine. And the center was established already in 1997. And actually that was the first NATO's information center beyond the borders of the alliance. And for, I would say, yeah, already for all these years, NATO Information Documentation Center has worked to increase understanding and awareness of Ukrainians and about NATO. And we work closely with, also, for example, with Anna Kopko and ANTS. We work with many other non-governmental organizations. And we also work with universities, and we have several information centers in the regions. And we have, back in the past, we have organized trips and study visits to Brussels for students and for journalists. And by the way, if you want to learn more about what NATO representation in Ukraine is doing, then I invite you to visit our Facebook account. Those ones who prefer Instagram, we also have Instagram account. And those ones who use Twitter, we have Twitter account. So, and here you can find lots of information and lots of materials about NATO representation in Ukraine. Thank you. So in case you have questions, I will try to reply.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for your wonderful presentations. And during your presentations, I imagined one flag, Ukrainian flag among all member states, flags in NATO headquarters office. So dear students, many questions. So who is, we have gender balance. So actually maybe Victoria. Let's start from Victoria Sherba and then Kirillo to keep balance, and then please.
Ms. Kляйне, thank you so much for the lecture. It was really very useful to me, and I guess to all the participants. So taking into consideration your background, I would like to talk about information security. And I have a question: how to spot propaganda at first sight, and how to distinguish real information from propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation?
Well, yeah, you know, everyone or all of us are exposed, you know, to fake news and then unverified, and that's why, you know, it's important. One thing is there are certain criteria. And one thing is indeed to use verified information sources and channels. So, and there are also several mechanisms. So, one thing what I advise is to look at what rhetorics is used. So, you know, whether information, so whether, you know, there are like, it's heated, you know, just, you know, or if, you know, just there are certain, you know, words or tones, so in which, you know, how information is shaped up. So it's important. So it's you know, reliable information channels. Then it's also important to check several information, you know, sources, so that you also get to know like a full spectrum of information. And it's very important also to understand the tone, to pay attention to a tone of an article. So how it's, and also how news is shaped, you know, if and who shares, you know, information. So whether, you know, this account, so or it's also, or maybe it's just, you know, it's just automatically created. So yeah, and if, and you know, and also if it has been like reposted. So yeah, there are several mechanisms. By the way, also on the NATO on NATO website, there is also like advice. So you know how to see, you know, how to distinguish, you know information which is, you know, reliable from unreliable information.
Yes, thank you.
In Turkish, I wanted to start to speak. Sorry. Good evening, and I want to ask you two questions. In your opinion, first of all, which minuses exist in NATO's system, like in structure or in rules, and what can be changed?
Which minuses?
Like in system. For example, NATO was made like 70 years ago, 72 years ago. And in your opinion, what should be done to make it better for now? Because some rules, as for me, are good, but it's not flexible to use them like in 2021. And second question I have like about Nord Stream 2 and migrant crisis. How can we solve together with NATO this problem?
Vінета, maybe I clarify, because the first question is probably regarding the weak sides of NATO operational system. Like the consensus approach means that the decisions which needed to be like adopted for yesterday, they might delay because each member state has to confirm its or approve. Sorry.
I understand. So yeah, I understand. Yeah, NATO is based, it's consensus-based organization. So, and sometimes indeed, you know, it may take more time. So yeah, it is a process can be longer but when NATO member states agree on something, it's indeed, you know, it's an agreement or it's the agreement. So that's why it may take, you know, more time. So, but when it's agreed, it's agreed. So, that is one thing. Another thing, so as I already said, it's about being adaptive. So about being, you know, adaptation. So actually, it's about constantly changing and adapting, you know, to new security challenges. That's why it's very important also that NATO member states that they invest into the capability development. It's very important that there is, you know, the political dialogue, because NATO first, it's a political organization, so which first tries to, you know, solve existing conflicts or disputes, you know, at the discussion table. So, and it's about indeed, you know, testing, so, and seeing, you know, what are emerging security challenges, so, and to adapt to them, so, and to be prepared and ready, you know, to react. And the second question was
about migrant crisis and Nord Stream 2. How can we solve this problem together with NATO? Because it's a big problem, like for Poland now, and for us about migrant crisis, and about Nord Stream 2, like for example, Germany accepts that Russia makes this Nord Stream 2, and some countries in NATO accept this Nord Stream, some countries in NATO don't accept this. But how can we solve this problem not to make a big war in the world?
Mm-hmm. So no, again, you know, I'll come back, you know, to discussion table. So I don't see any other, you know, way how to solve, you know, constructively. So just, and then, you know, optimally. So by the only way is indeed, you know, to sit at the table, you know, and discuss and go through, you know, and then find a solution, you know, that, you know, of all sides, you know, are satisfied with. And it's one thing, and indeed, you know, we all observe and we all follow, you know, you know, refugee or immigrant crisis. So right now on the border with Poland and Belarus, and also it affects Baltic countries, so Lithuania and then Latvia. So indeed, so you know, it's very important also that you know, solution is there, so, and that we find, you know, solutions, so, and that also that people don't freeze, you know, it's November and it's indeed cold, so, and that we find solution, and that also that migration, you know, that this crisis doesn't become a security crisis. So indeed, you know, that we all are ready, and then we all are constructing that we, you know, find the way how to solve it, because it can't become a security threat and crisis.
Sorry, and one more question, if it's possible.
Кирило, we understand that we have too many
Я малесенький, будь
ladies.
ласка.
Okay. Добре.
Little question. You understand that this migrant crisis like exists, and among these migrants exist some like agents from Russia that can go to Ukraine or to Europe. We know that, and in your opinion, what can be done like to prevent this? Because it can be horrible for future.
Yeah, Kirill, I can't verify this information. I don't, you know, I don't possess, you know, this information. So what you mentioned, so now, but indeed, so really, you know, I'll come back to what I already said. You know that, you know, migrant crisis can't become, you know, security crisis. That's why we need to work together, and that's why also I know that we need to find, you know, a civilized way, you know, to deal with that.
Understood. Thank you very much.
So who is next? Daria, Anna, Alisa, Irina? So,
yes, I'm ready. Can I ask you?
Yeah.
So first of all, I would like to say thank you. And my question is, you have mentioned among different threats. One is cyber security and cyber terrorism. So, and as we see, it comes more destructive, not only for Europe, but only for all world. And my question is, does Alliance have for now like certain mechanism to protect itself, and how effective they are?
Thank you. Yeah, indeed. So we have certain mechanisms. We also have like supporting groups, you know, who also, you know, deal with that, and also we have also groups that support, for example, you know, NATO member states, you know, also to deal with cyber threats. So, and then we also have, for example, in Estonia, it's also it's not, you know, also have a cybersecurity center of excellence, so which is located in Estonia. So this indeed is a threat, you know, that affects all of us. And for example, I would like to mention a platform which also exists. It's NATO Ukraine countering hybrid warfare platform. So within which we have several activities, joint activities with NATO and Ukraine. And for example, just recently we conducted a tabletop exercise so in Odessa, coherent resilience, during which we tested resilience and of Ukraine's infrastructure, and also agencies that, you know, are responsible for infrastructure protection. And also we also tested how efficient is interagency work of Ukrainian institutions. So, and within this platform, we also run media literacy courses or training courses for Ukrainian journalists, media representatives, and for public servants. And it's about increasing also just, you know, increasing their about, you know, being able to do fact checking, so, and also being able, you know, to detect and verify information source and information which appears in the public domain. So that's why cybersecurity, it is one of the I would say one of the major security challenge for all of us, you know, for NATO allies and for partner countries.
Thank you a lot.
Yana.
Good evening. I wanted to say thank you very much for attending this lecture. I wanted to ask if Is the chancellor change in German will affect the German's politics in NATO and attitude to Ukraine in particular? So maybe this will affect in some way this part of politics.
Maybe the question was because we discussed Vінета.
I'm sorry if I repeat the question.
No, because probably Jana meant because a lot of speakers previously discussed the Budapest, the Bucharest Summit, sorry, Budapest Memorandum, Bucharest Summit in 2008, when Ukraine and Georgia expected to see more progress on receiving membership action plan, and actually probably Jana wanted to ask what are the expectations from...
Yes, but this was a question more about votings and elections in Germany. So when the Merkel went like from the post of chancellor and the new chancellor came, so maybe this will affect too, no? I meant this moment.
You know, Germany is a very valued NATO's partner. So like the rest of 29. So yeah, and then Germany, you know, highly contributes. So, and also I know, you know, Germany also very much helps and supports, you know, Ukraine also in the reform process. So, and you know, I wouldn't speculate. So, and I wouldn't, you know, I would, you know, restrain, you know, for commenting, you know, Germany's, you know, domestic politics. So, but when it comes to NATO, indeed, you know, we highly value on, for example, when we speak. And I, in 2011 and 15, I worked in Kosovo. So I was on NATO advisory team in Kosovo, advising Ministry for Kosovo Security Force. And there is also, maybe you have heard that NATO's mission, also, yeah, KFOR is you know, one of the, is the oldest also NATO's mission. So and in KFOR, I, on an everyday basis, I was meeting my counterparts and also colleagues, colleagues, German colleagues. So it's indeed, so it's a very valued, you know, NATO's partner. So and I know all the contributions what Germany is doing and investing.
Thank you very much.
So Anna Pesik, please.
NATO Information and Documentation Center has started a new project, 100 Facts About NATO. And the 22nd one was about gender equality and especially collaboration in this sphere with different countries or organizations such as African Union. Could you tell us alliances steps to achieve these goals in Africa?
You know, Africa, so I can speak, you know, what NATO is doing, you know, when it comes to women, peace and security agenda. So yeah, because I have worked in the Balkans and I'm now working in Ukraine. So yeah, and indeed, you know, I know that better. So, and I would better speak, you know, the NATO, you know, this agenda, women, peace and security when it comes to NATO member states, so, or when it comes to Ukraine. So when indeed for NATO, it's very important that integrity is ensured, that also that both women and men, they have like equal access, you know, and also, and when it comes to equal access and equal, you know, like conditions, and when it comes to NATO allies and NATO member states, and when it comes to armed force, so it's very important that this equality is ensured, and also that equal treatment is ensured. So, and that is, and for example, NATO has has a special NATO Secretary General also has special representative for women, peace and security. And just recently, I think yesterday was announced that now NATO has a new, you know, like a special representative for women, peace and security. And indeed, it's this United Nations Security Council's resolution 1325, you know, is very important that is also included in all operational aspects. So when it comes to NATO's operations and then missions, that it's respected, that it is embedded, and it's an integral part of, you know, everything what NATO does, you know, starting from policies and then ending, you know, with operations and operational theater.
Thank you.
Irina Batura, please.
Thank you for such an interesting lecture. My question is Ukraine doing enough to fight Russia's propaganda and oppose the hybrid warfare?
I think Ukraine is doing a great job, and I can name at least 10 respectable Ukrainian fact-checking organizations. So you have great fact checkers. So, and your accumulated knowledge and expertise, it's something what you can share with NATO allies and what you can share with member states, alliance member states. And I think it's very important when it comes to countering disinformation, it's very important that, because everyone, you know, each member of society has a role to play. So whether it's, you know, academia, it's, you know, government, the media and private sector, and each has a particular role. So, and I think, yeah, you have accumulated huge experience. And I think indeed, so, and of course it's, you know, because Ukraine is constantly being exposed to disinformation campaigns and propaganda, and you are accumulating this information, this knowledge. So, and I know that you are also sharing, and we, within Countering Hybrid Warfare platform, we also work, for example, with Internews, and Internews, also in jointly with other fact-checking organizations in Ukraine, also run this media literacy course. So, and I also follow them with great interest, because many things are also, you know, interesting for me.
Thanks, Vінета. Veronica is next with the question, please.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for an interesting lecture. And my question, what Ukraine should do to show itself as a reliable partner for NATO?
Thank you. I think, no, not that I think, I know, and Ukraine is a reliable, very reliable partner for the alliance. And during the years, Ukraine has become one of the most reliable and also, you know, one of the major NATO partners, because we, you highly support and you support NATO missions and operations. There are several trainings which are being run together with NATO allies and Ukraine. So also you're supporting NATO response force. So you have tremendously supported allies during the COVID pandemic. For example, I remember that last year in spring, when Italy was heavily hit by the pandemic, you deployed to Italy your medics. You have supported several member states with your huge, you know, Antonov aircraft, and by also doing, you know, airlifting. And this is a partnership. So, and it's a two-way partnership. So it's not only that that NATO supports Ukraine, it's vice versa. So, and also Ukraine also significantly supports NATO. And for example, maybe you know about the fact that last year in June, Ukraine was granted an enhanced opportunities partner status. It means that Ukraine is one of 6, you know, 6 countries which has been granted this status, enhanced or EOP, enhanced opportunities partner status. So, and this you know status was granted due to as a recognition of Ukraine's significant contributions to NATO operations.
Okay, thanks for answer.
So Katya Malyovana, please.
Yes, I have a question. Does the NATO have a plan to take the China as a country member? Or no?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, yeah, thank you for the question. So, NATO is a Euro-Atlantic alliance. So it means that actually, yeah, only countries, you know, which are part of Europe, so or Euro-Atlantic area, so like Canada, so and the United States, you know, can be members of the alliance.
So Alisa, as I also has a question, yeah?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for a comprehensive lecture, and I have questions. As far as I understood, the aim of the Center of Documentation and Information in Ukraine is to raise awareness among Ukrainians about NATO. So what is the target audience of your communication, and how do you make sure that you are heard by these people?
Thank you, very good question. So yeah, our target audience, so we work with the youth, we work, you know, with NGO, with civil society, we work with government representatives. So by the way, we also now have a project which is also targeted at members of parliament. So we develop policy papers and we'll have roundtables. So it's government. We work with the media, so we work with academia. So you see, you know, we have, you know, broad range of let's say, target. We target, you know, lots of target groups. So let's say like this, and we have lots of partners. We already have many, you know, partners we engage for many years, and which also support our work, because without you know, Ukrainian support, what could we do? So yeah, that's why this engagement, this partnership and partnering with Ukrainian, you know, for example, civil sector, so is very, very, very important. So what we do, so we listen. Yeah, and very, very important, as already said, you know, NATO also applies, you know, dual track approach. It's we listen, so we analyze, and we engage. So, and this is how we get feedback. So, because feedback is very important for us. And I also frequently, when I meet, for example, like young people, so yeah, and my Ukrainian colleagues and friends, I also frequently ask them, what else, you know, should we do, or maybe something we should do in different ways, or maybe something we do, maybe we should do something else. So yeah, what is your advice and recommendations? So I'm always just, you know, I'm always open for good advice. Thanks.
And thanks, Vineta, actually, for supporting youth in Ukraine. And Valery Kravchenko, during his presentation, he mentioned also a project, and I hope our participants will also submit their essays. Okay, so 2 last questions before we finish. Wonderful and very comprehensive lecture. So Roman, please.
Good afternoon. Because you, Mrs. Wynette, had experience working in the Ministry of Kosovo Security Forces, I have a chance to get answer to two questions about the problems of Kosovo and the views of different countries on the independence of the region. We all know the historical problem of the whole region. Serbia's use Helsinki final 1975, and on the other hand, the territory of modern Kosovo was inhabited by Albanian tribes and was captured Serbs in the Middle Ages. Albanians have historical rights to this area. Many countries have a similar problem, so I think Kosovo is a catalyst for the problem. It's logical that after on February 17, 2008, the world received different views on this problem. Spain, Georgia, Moldova, and Russia did not recognize the independence of the region. Is logical. I would call it, this is a fact of Catalonia, you know. Our country.
What's your question? So yeah, can we come to the question?
1 minute, please. Our country took a neutral position. I want to talk about Turkey's position and threatening its influence on the Republic of Kosovo after 2010. Received the question of when Turkey began to interfere in the educational program and the newly created republic. On the other hand, Turkey defended the living of Kosovo. We all understand that in 2018, the authorities of the Republic of Kosovo banned it rally in support of Kurdistan's independence. I wonder the truth. It's rational to limit the influence of countries such as Turkey to the independent position of Republic of Kosovo. This is my first question. And
I'm afraid I didn't, get fully, your question. So.
One more.
Roman, your next question, please.
Yeah,
next. All right.
Yeah.
My other question is more global. The problem of the national minorities remains uncertain. It's an excellent manipulation mechanism for strong countries. We all understand that the Helsinki Final Act of 1975 has already lost its relevance and effectiveness. And my second question, will NATO consider working with the EU to create a new strategy to solve this problem?
To solve what problem?
With minorities, national minorities. It's, I think it's a mechanism for strange countries to manipulate another countries.
Roman,
what do you think about it?
Maybe you can really, a bit, got lost.
Actually, Roman, sorry, I didn't get your question, so to be honest, може українською мовою все-таки, бо я не зрозуміла, в чому питання.
Можливо, трошки запутано було.
Ну, воно реально було не просто запутане. Одне з якраз із завдань треба вчитися формулювати питання так, щоб уникнути певних misreadings, непорозумінь, недочитань і так далі. Я насправді не зрозуміла, в чому про national minorities, національні меншини і в чому суть питання.
Давайте спробуємо ще раз. Перше моє питання заключалося в тому, щоб чи є механізм для утримування таких країн, як Туреччина, від маніпуляції? Тобто Туреччина в 2018 році, в 10-му, перепрошую, намагалася втрутитися у освітню програму Республіки Косово новоствореної, і тим самим потім Республіка Косово в 2018 році заборонила проведення акції на підтримку Республіки Курдистан. і чи є механізми нейтралізації впливу таких країн на, скажімо так, на політику менших країн? Це перше моє питання. І друге моє питання заключалося в тому, чи є акт, Хельсінський акт 1975 року до цих пір актуальним, адже з одного боку албанці захищають своїх національні меншини в Республіці Косово, а з іншого боку серби, скажімо так, користуються тим, що їхня національна меншина є в цій даній республіці і намагаються втручитися.
Так, я думаю, що Вінета, I'm not sure you...
I can, no, really, so then, Roman, then I need the facts, you know, just really, so to operate with, so really, I just can't, you know, then I need, you know, facts, you know, and I need, you know, analysis, you know, in order to comment, you know, your questions. So, yeah, what I can tell you, you know, when I was in Kosovo, it was 2011 and 15, so, and also why KFOR is there. KFOR is there, you know, Kosovo, you know, security force. So, just KFOR, yeah. NATO, you know, operation. So it's in order to ensure also just, you know, free movement. So yeah, in order also just, you know, just it's there as a stabilizing factor. So that is what I can tell you. So yeah, but in order to reply to your question, I indeed need, you know, more facts. So I really, you know, I didn't fully, you know, get, you know, your question.
Okay. Романа, щодо утримуватися від маніпуляцій, я думаю, що це непросте питання. І ми, на прикладі, навіть завжди в таких випадках є двосторонні відносини різних держав. І навіть в ситуації Україна-Угорщина, коли Угорщина час від часу використовує питання національної меншини на Закарпатті, теж, зокрема, для того, щоб не підтримувати євроатлантичні прагнення на Україну. А це інша тема дискусії. У нас останнє запитання зараз. Будь ласка, Настя Конурчук.
Дякую. Моє запитання коротке. Good evening. In your opinion, is Russian aggression really such a big obstacle for Ukraine to be a member of NATO?
Okay, first of all, it should be understood that a country, you know, an aspiring country, you know, to become a member state of the alliance, it's a decision that is taken by 30 member states, by 30 NATO member states. And it's only between, you know, an aspiring country and NATO member states. So, and there is no other, you know, party that has a say, you know, in this process. So, however, there are certain criteria, you know, which should be ensured in order a country can become, you know, in order a country becomes a member state. That is, so, and again, you know, I want to underline that it's only between an aspiring country and NATO member states. And I think it's a good point, you know, also, yeah, just, you know, that we, you know, sum up, you know, conclude our, you know, conversation.
Yeah, Vінета, and I think your support of this NATO PA Youth Model project is also a good investment in the future of Ukraine moving towards Euro-Atlantic membership. So I think it's really important that today you shared your experience and also presented the activities of NATO's Information and Documentation Center and the projects you have. And I'm sure that students or participants learned a lot. And we will meet in person, as I hope the pandemic situation will allow us to do it in December. Actually, I would recommend our students to monitor announcements and public information at the NATO Center. Actually, because Vінeta also mentioned NATO 2030 strategy and vision, and they also have NATO engages, NATO Youth Engages projects for young people from different NATO countries, plus Ukraine, Georgia. So actually, young people could join to different initiatives, and having an enhanced opportunity partner status, it also means a lot. It's, of course, it's not membership, but still we are moving towards membership, to receive membership. And I hope within next decade, definitely we will see Ukrainian flag among those flags which are now in the headquarters office in Brussels. So, dear students, let's say thank you to Vінета and for wonderful and very important lecture, and thank you very much. It was really informative. So, students, I think it's important to see one day some of you running Ukrainian offices in Parliament, in Ministry of Foreign Affairs, joining to think tanks. And this project also creates you a lot of opportunities. Thanks a million. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. And good luck, and see you in Kyiv. Yeah.
Yes, see you in Kyiv. So thanks again, Vінeta, and to your team also for supporting all these initiatives. Yeah, thanks, fabulous. So our students are very thankful, and I hope we'll learn more. Okay, have a good weekend, and students, see you on Monday. As you remember, on Monday we have two lectures.
Yeah.
From NATO PA, former president, and one of the best experts in energy security, also expert on hybrid aggression. So we will share some books, Михайло Гончар. So see you on Monday. All the best. А ті, хто не приєдналися, хай дивляться окремо лінки. Там все. Та, на все добре.
Побачення.
До побачення.